Welcome back, everybody, to another reaction video. Well, a week or two ago, we took a look at Sabaton's fantastic song, The Last Battle, which is the story of one of the strangest incidents of World War II that happened the last week of the war in Europe, when a group of American soldiers, along with a group of German soldiers from the Wehrmacht, along with apparently at least one SS officer, joined forces in defending Castle Itter, which was a political prison that held some high-ranking political captives of the Germans. Defended that castle against and attacked by Waffen-SS soldiers who were coming there to eliminate the prisoners. So I'm excited to dive into a little more of that story by watching the Sabaton history behind the song, and I invite you to join me with that, and let's continue the conversation down below. That is the goal of these reaction videos. I'm not trying to, get famous off of other people's work, things like that. I'm using these videos as an opportunity to spark a conversation for us, using the comment section below, using our Discord, so that we can all learn together. That's the goal. I hope we all learn a little something we didn't know today. Let's dive in.
Wait. In World War II, Germans and Americans fighting together?
Oh, yeah.
During the beginning of the end for the Third Reich in World War II, the Allies planned the invasion of the German homeland. Rumors had long circulated about an impregnable alpine fortress stretching all over the northwestern part of Austria, into which Hitler and his loyal followers would retreat if the war ever came to the Reich itself. The Allies were concerned about deep underground bunkers blasted into the high mountains which could stockpile guns and supplies. Such a fortress could prolong the war for several months. Most of their fears were, of course, unfounded. But deep within northern Tyrol, there actually stood such an old fortress. Schloss Itter had been a medieval castle. Its foundations can be traced back to the 13th century. Over the centuries, the castle had fallen into ruin until it was rebuilt in the 19th century. In 1943, it had been seized by the SS and incorporated into the Dachau concentration camp system.
So it's important to note that by and large, the war had been pretty conventional in Europe as far as there being front lines and men fighting out in the open, things of that nature. I mean, obviously finding cover and stuff. I'm going through right now listening to the series by Dan Carlin on the War in the Pacific, his podcast series, which is fantastic, by the way, and I highly recommend it. And he talks about the nature of the Pacific War and how different it was, because basically in the Pacific, what you have are small numbers of Japanese soldiers on islands that are dug into bunkers in the ground, sometimes just caves in the ground, in small numbers, maybe 15, 20 men in a cave, fighting to the death with absolutely no intention of surrendering. And if they do surrender, it's usually because they want to try and take some of you with them. So the concern here is that that's what's going to happen, is that you're going to have the hardcore Waffen-SS, the high Nazi party officials, things of that nature, going up into the Alps in southern Bavaria, in Austria, and fighting a guerrilla war, and that this could devolve into something akin to what's happening in the Pacific. So that's a concern. Of course, like he said, it didn't happen, but you can obviously see how high command for the Allies is worried about that, because they know what that looks like in the Pacific.
The old fairy tale-like castle became a prison for high-profile prisoners. Some of France's most influential politicians and generals, like Edouard Daladier, Maurice Gamelin, Michel Clemenceau, and Paul Reynaud, were even held there. By the end of April 1945, the noose was tightening around the Germans. The Red Army marched deep into Hungary from the east. German forces had surrendered in Italy to the south, and the Western Allies advanced towards Tyrol from the west. What was left of the shattered remnants of the German army flooded back into Austria, and Tyrol grew full of the last die-hard Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS troops, whose mere presence would keep many other soldiers from surrendering. But there was also another group there that is often overlooked, the Austrian resistance. After the Anschluss in 1938, there had always been a number of native Austrians who stood against the Nazis. For many years, they could only offer passive and non-violent opposition.
And this must have really stuck in Hitler's mind in a negative way, because this, first of all, is his country of birth, Austria. He probably in his mind figured that Austrians and Germans, they're all part of this greater German Reich, right? And I think he probably expected Austria to welcome becoming a part of the Reich with open arms. And the fact that there were these German people, Germanic people in Austria who did not go along with things must have really irritated Hitler. And so it's kind of interesting to see that there is such a strong Austrian resistance.
But with the Allies just a few miles away, they could finally act. They provided valuable intelligence about the German defenses and directed the army spearheads through the Inn River Valley. But their most important goal was to protect the Austrian citizens from bloody reprisals by the SS. Already people were hanging white flags and Austrian flags out from their windows, and the SS did not hesitate to open fire on these defeatists. The mood inside Castle Itter was dark. The French VIPs, very important prisoners, feared that the SS guards would rather execute them than release them to the Allies. But then on May the 4th, after the last commander of Dachau shot himself in his quarters and the SS officer in charge took that as his cue to disappear, the castle was suddenly empty. Reynaud and Clemenceau took a stroll out of the castle gates and into Itter village, but quickly turned around. The roads were still full of patrolling SS troops, setting up roadblocks and machine gun posts. Back in the castle, the French VIPs discussed their situation. It was clear that they were still trapped, and that it probably wouldn't be long until the SS reminded itself of their existence. So they came up with a plan.
And you have to put yourself in the mind of these prisoners for a minute. Okay, we're safe for the moment, but we know that the Allies are getting close, and we know the SS is still here. At any moment, they could show up and decide to kill us, and they've got the numbers to do it. We wouldn't really be able to protect ourselves. And, this was a common thing. Look at Tsar Nicholas II and his family in Russia in 1918. It was when the armies of the opposition got close that they were executed, because it was better to kill them and remove the possibility of them returning to power or anything like that, than to hang on to them and risk, the possibility that would happen. So, that's kind of probably what they're thinking here, is they're going to kill us the first chance they remember that we're still here.
First, they would sew together a French tricolor banner and hang it from the inner walls to alert Allied aircraft to their presence. Next, they would get in contact with a rather unlikely member of the Austrian underground resistance. SS Captain Kurt Siegfried Schrader could have played the stereotypical Nazi villain in a Tarantino movie. Highly decorated, he had served as a bodyguard in Hitler's headquarters. After being badly wounded in desperate fighting in France, he broke with the Fuhrer and defected to the resistance. Schrader promised to help, but he knew that his authority could only buy them some time. If any higher-ups in the SS decided to storm the keep and kill everyone inside, his rank could not prevent it. All agreed that only the quick arrival of the US Army would save their lives. They sent out the Czech cook to establish contact, but halfway to the American lines, in the town of Vergel, he was nearly caught by a patrol, but being pulled into a nearby house saved his life. His savior was Major Joseph Gangl. Gangl was a career soldier in the Wehrmacht since 1935. From the war's beginning to Stalingrad, Normandy, and Bastogne, Gangl had seen everything, but he too had returned a disillusioned man, and like Schrader, chose to betray his oath to the Nazis.
So I believe that before they sent out the cook, there had actually been another instance in which they had sent somebody out to find the nearest American soldiers they could find, and I think he was like 40 miles away before he found any, and so he was in no position to really help and get them back. So that's why they send out this cook who ends up connecting with Gangl, but Gangl knew that he didn't have enough men to do it on his own.
Now, we don't quite know how such decorated soldiers gained the trust of the resistance, but at the moment, it mattered little. Gangl and the Czech cook set out to find the Americans. Driving just a few miles cross-country, they suddenly spotted several Sherman tanks in a small village. Slamming on the brakes, Gangl, still wearing his uniform, got out, hands in the air. he was led to the nearest U.S. officer, Captain John Carey Lee. After listening to their story, Lee radioed headquarters, and after a quick exchange, the 27-year-old former college football star from New York enthusiastically declared they were going on a rescue mission.
And that's impressive, and I think he went by Jack. So Jack Lee is the name of this captain, and it's impressive that they were so gung-ho to do this because, I'm putting myself in his position, and the first thing I'm going to think is this a trap? Is this German soldier just trying to lure me in so that they can kill some Americans and, in the last moments of the war? But I love the fact that he calls the higher-ups, he gets the okay to do it, and then they just go right in.
Lee's unit was part of the 12th Armored Division, which now, after Hitler's death, was not quite as enthusiastic as their captain to risk their lives fighting die-hard Nazis in the final hours of the European war. Lee, however, was determined and set off with his ad hoc task force of 7 Shermans. His own tank, the Besotten Jenny, took the lead. At the next river, however, only 4 of his tanks were able to cross a wooden bridge before it gave way. His force reduced, the column rumbled on. Arriving in Woodhull, they were warmly received by the Austrian resistance and joined by a group of German soldiers loyal to Gangl. Although the Waffen-SS had left Woodhull, Lee left 2 of his tanks behind to support the resistance in case they came back. The 2 remaining Shermans, Besotten Jenny and Boschbuster, moved on with the Germans in tow. Close to Itter village, they had to cross another bridge, which had already been wired with explosives. Lee ordered Boschbuster to stay behind and guard their only route back. Without further incident, Besotten Jenny and around a dozen American and German soldiers arrived at the castle gates. While the men went inside, Lee ordered Besotten Jenny to turn around to block the entrance.
So if I'm the prisoners inside this castle at this point, I'm like, 12 men. That's what you brought. You brought 12 men and a tank. He started out with 7, and it's impressive that he's willing to kind of spread out his force so thin and leave a few here or there. It's good thinking in terms of, we've got to think about how we're going to get back out of here after this is over, but it's also dangerous depending on the size of the force that you're going to be facing.
In the castle, perhaps one of the most unlikely scenes of the war took place. An American Army captain, a Waffen-SS officer, and a German Army major made a plan to defend French hostages from loyal Nazis in a medieval Austrian castle.
That's incredible.
I know. Schrader reported seeing several Waffen-SS trucks moving around carrying anti-tank guns. Lee, knowing that American reinforcements were on their way, ordered the French prisoners to seek shelter in the keep while the soldiers took guard at the castle walls. They were only lightly armed with rifles and submachine guns, but the firepower of Besotten Jenny would give them a chance. Lee went to bed, but it would be a short night. At 4 a.m., he awoke to the sound of gunfire. A German MG-42 was firing at the gatehouse, and Jenny's .50 caliber was answering. Tracer rounds were flying through the dark as the men on the western wall suddenly spotted SS men carrying grappling hooks. The SS was clearly looking for a way in, but the fire from the defenders had spoiled their plans so far. Gangl, Schrader, and their Castle Krauts kept them at bay, firing from the upper floors while the Americans defended the gatehouse.
So it was good they got there when they did, because obviously they barely got there. I don't know what the time frame was between when Lee and Gangl and their men arrive to defend the castle and when the SS arrives, but it's obviously that night at 4 in the morning, so there really wasn't a lot of wiggle room here.
Trust between the Germans and Americans had been shaky at best, but now none of them would survive if the SS got in. Shortly after 8:30, things got real. They spotted a 20mm anti-aircraft cannon and an 88mm gun northwest of the castle, with truckloads of Waffen-SS soldiers arriving. The first 88 shells smashed into the castle, and the whole structure shook. Then a staccato of 20mm shells began blasting small gaps into the walls. Things went from bad to worse. Besotten Jenny rocked violently backwards. Seeing fire spurting from the engine access grills, the crew jumped out of the burning Sherman tank just in time before a second anti-tank shell sealed its fate. With their chances of survival now seriously reduced, the French VIPs took up arms and joined the defenders at the gatehouse. The elderly Reynaud, France's prime minister early in the war, fired his MP40 through the open window, and Gangle ran over to help. But he didn't get far. The man who had seen the European part of the war from the beginning to its final battle was killed by a sniper. With more 88mm rounds smashing into the castle walls, however, there was no time to mourn him. Waffen-SS soldiers were moving up the slopes, pressing home the attack. With the radio blown to pieces, Schrader directed Lee to the castle telephone. Reaching the resistance back in Woodhull, Lee yelled into the telephone that they were in need of immediate assistance or they would soon be shelled to pieces.
Good thing they had the phone number, right? I mean, I guess they obviously had planned for this and had the contact information from somebody to be able to get the phone call out, and thankfully that line hadn't been cut or something to cut off their communication. The SS hadn't thought of that.
Then another round exploded against the castle, and the line went dead. Germans, Frenchmen, and Americans fought for their lives, but ammunition was running low. With Gangle dead and several Wehrmacht soldiers wounded, they were close to being overrun. Lee began pulling the defenders off the walls and deeper into the keep as he saw a squad of Waffen-SS close to the gatehouse. Just as they brought a Panzerfaust into position, a sudden rattle of heavy machine guns tore into them. The cavalry had arrived, and just in the nick of time, with the additional firepower of the American tanks, the battle took a decisive turn. The remaining SS troops quickly dispersed into the woods, and the castle was saved. All the French VIPs had survived, thanks to one of the least likely alliances of this or any other war. Marcus Linke, who does a lot of the research for these episodes, and I cannot understand why there is not a major movie about this story.
Absolutely.
The Last Battle.
Absolutely. I don't understand that. There's so many incredible stories in history that have not been made into movies. How anybody hasn't made a major motion picture about Ulysses S. Grant or about Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, there have been movies and documentaries made, but nothing major. Although there is one coming about, I think, about Ulysses S. Grant with, it's about Theodore Roosevelt, and it has Leonardo DiCaprio playing the role. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
So I understand why you would pick this, but I'm surprised how'd you discover this?
I can't even remember, actually, if I'm honest.
Yeah?
It's just how, I think it was an email, a book or something. I remember so clearly, like, reading about it, how I instantly knew that this is a song.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And it was such a... Writing the lyrics for the first was amazing fun. Just only writing the music as well. Finally, you can do something that's a little bit more positive, happy, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, I like catchy heavy metal. Every song doesn't have to be super dark.
Yeah, and this is a really catchy song. It's like just the way that it moves, and he's right. The focus of the song is not about men, like it's not the typical like dark like invasion and everybody dies, and it's a positive story. It's men who were former enemies fighting alongside each other to defend innocent civilians, and it's just it's perfect for a song.
I like it when it's opens up a bit.
But you guys are fairly bombastic, and it's nice that I'm with you.
This one is like the message and the music, and also messing with the fans. We like doing that is in lyrics. We do it every now and then in some of them. For example, in this case, there's tank called Jenny in the battle.
Yeah.
And of course, we're singing Jenny at the gates as the SS open fire. And if you haven't read anything,
you don't.
Jenny at what's this?
So who's she?
Yeah, who's this Jenny girl?
Yeah. Who is she? What does she mean to you, Joachim?
Oh, Jenny's my longtime lover.
Did your lady friend watch this?
I hope not.
But it's interesting just that action of the unlikeliest of people to be fighting with each other, because that same year, something we covered in the Time Ghost series, the Indonesian War of Independence, late in 1945, in Indonesia, you had the Japanese and British soldiers fighting together.
Wait, what?
It was the weirdest thing to read that.
I didn't know about that.
Get the fuck out of here. British and Japanese.
Wow. And see, that is actually much more unlikely when you consider the nature of the war in the Pacific, the way that, especially with the Japanese treatment of civilians and, just the nature of that war, where there was a lot more hate, I think. It's probably more similar to how the Germans and the Soviets were against each other in terms of the hate and the level of animosity between the sides that didn't really exist so much between Germans and Americans. So that does seem even more unlikely, and now I find myself curious about that situation.
And 1945 was one crazy-ass year.
Yep.
And we're talking about it from 75 years later in another crazy-ass year.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, this year's not done. We still have an asteroid heading to destroy Earth. We have the wildfires. You're releasing your first solo album on October 16th, if I'm not mistaken.
R&B album.
Check that out.
Nagy's
R&B
album. It's called And Me, I'm Joachim
From Sabaton.
See,
All right, so it seems like they're done talking about the story, so I'll wrap it up right here. But let me know your thoughts about that. I'm sure there's much more to the story than what we covered there, but it just give you a little more detail into the situation with the Battle of Castle Itter. One of those places I'm hoping, I don't know if it's still there. Time to pull out the glasses and look that up. Guess what? It is. It is still there. It's in Itter, Austria. Let's take a look at a 3D look at this bad boy. I guess we're not going to get much of a good look like that. But there she is. Right in this area here. And there's the bridge, I guess, that was kind of protecting that area. So now I found a new area that I need to go to when I visit Austria for the first time. Let's kind of just zoom out and give a little bit of a sense of where this is. My internet's running particularly slowly today. So there you go. You get a little bit more of a sense. It really is right there in the foot of the Alps. It's right near Innsbruck, actually. Looks like, what, maybe 30 miles from Innsbruck. So definitely an area. It's southeast of Munich. Salzburg is over here, so it's right in that area. I will definitely be checking that out when I get a chance to go to Europe. So thank you in advance to everyone who supports this channel that will make that kind of thing possible. Don't forget to hit that like button. I'll put the link in the description to the original Sabaton history video. We'll see you again soon.